But if you're going to lead a business, you absolutely need to have that self-belief that you're there for a reason and you can absolutely get this job done.
Thrilled to be joined by Claire Williams today, former Deputy Team Principal of Williams Racing and Formula One analyst on Netflix's hit documentary Drive to Survive. Claire joins me today to explore the inner workings of an F1 team, from female representation and sustainability to high performance and leadership. Firstly, thank you so much for sitting down with me, Claire.
Thank you for the introduction. That was quite overwhelming, but yes, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Of course. I would love to start with your time as Deputy Team Principal, during which you undertook an incredibly large-scale culture transformation at Williams. What was that experience like for you?
Yes, I probably started the cultural transformation program at the tail end of my time running the team back in 2018. The first 4 or 5 years of my time to having taken over was very much focused on the business transformation, turning the team's fortunes around. And we did that. And then I think, as we probably all would anticipate, when you're doing well, particularly as a sports team, your kind of culture just is great. You're winning everything. Everyone's happy. No one cares about, any little niggles. And it actually only becomes really apparent when your culture isn't doing so well, when your business isn't performing or your team isn't performing. And therefore, that became quickly apparent to me that our culture just wasn't where I wanted it to be in about 2018, and I needed to do something about it. At the time, our race car wasn't where we wanted it to be, but I'm not an engineer. I can't, figure out how to make the front wing fast. But what I absolutely knew I could do to help drive performance, because I am a massive believer in culture, can have a huge impact on your team's performance. What I could do was to affect change when it came to our culture. I'd grown up in this team. I knew this amazing culture that my father had really organically created through his work and through how he operated. He created this team that was full of people that were passionate, and all they cared about was going racing. All they cared about was winning, and they would roll their sleeves up and they would do whatever they needed to get that done. But I felt over the years we had lost this kind of culture. And I needed to understand why. And the only way in which I could do that was to talk to people within the team. So I did this through our mini town halls. I talked to 1,000 people over the course of a year to actually understand why we thought our culture wasn't where it needed to be. It was so informative. I cannot talk or advocate enough to talking to your people if your culture isn't great, to actually understand why it isn't great. Because at the end of the day, they're at the heart of your culture and they understand what's going on in the day-to-day. So this provided me with the groundwork, I suppose, the blueprint for this cultural transformation program that we called Next Gen Williams. And there were a lot of strands to it. There was rebuilding our communications. There were putting in respect initiatives, putting in a Women at Williams network, putting in team building programs, all this kind of stuff, new bonus performance related bonuses at the end of the year, etc. There was so much within it. But what we absolutely saw was the power of that cultural transformation program, the power of Next Gen Williams, the power of redefining our mission, our vision and our values. And all of that absolutely put us back on the path to going back out to the racetrack with our sleeves rolled up, with that core DNA running through us of being pure racers and being there to race to win.
I mean, you must have gained really incredible insight during these town hall style meetings. From that experience, what leadership strategies do you think can be transferred from Formula One to business?
I think the greatest lesson that I probably ever learned from my dad was presence and communication. And I think those are two of the strongest lessons. When I think about my time in Formula One, what I learned from him and what I learned just through by being a leader, I suppose, was the power of presence. Your team want to see you. They want to see you walking around your organization. It's no good just being sat in your office and nobody sees you. Have the open door policy. Go around. I used to do regular walkabouts 2 or 3 times a week. I used to clear 2 to 3 hours of my diary every morning and I used to do a walkabout around the factory, and I just used to cherry pick people to talk to check in with them, see how they were doing, see what they were working on. But of equal importance was to ask how they were doing personally, like to understand, how's their husband, how's their wife, how are their kids, do they have everything that they need? And for me, that was really powerful. And I did this as well I organised lunches with Claire. So these poor people, like every week, I would get my PA to invite 5 people to have lunch with me so that they can tell me the good, the bad, and the ugly about Williams. And it was no whole bars, but it was so informative for me. So as a leader, I suppose that then talks into communications and how important being a good communicator is, and understanding the importance of communications when you don't have it, which is a scenario I witnessed endlessly at Williams, of not having this strong tier of communications trickling through your organization. If you don't have that, people don't know what's going on. They don't feel connected. They don't understand what leaders are doing. For example, if you're not doing so well, if your business isn't performing well, if you don't have strong communications to talk about what you're doing as leaders to get the business out of the position it's in, how do people trust that you know what you're doing as a leader? And so I think from my perspective, those were certainly 2 of the most important lessons that I learned, that I made sure ran through my leadership of the team. But there are so many other leadership issues, I suppose, that people can learn from Formula One. One of them probably being resilience and the importance of having a thick skin when you are a leader, and just letting things, I suppose, fall off, water off a duck's back. You can't let the negative get too much in the way of what you're doing. You've just got to have your goal, your focus, your objective, and make sure that none of that negative noise gets in the way of meeting your targets and your goals as the leader.
And the blame often falls to the team principal. So it's obvious that this approach works, because under your leadership, Williams achieved its best race outcome since 2003 with 3rd place championship finishes. There must have been so many high pressure situations during this period. So what would you say is the secret to staying calm in high pressure environments like Formula One?
Breathing. That helps. And I say that kind of flippantly, but actually I mean it in terms of looking after yourself and sometimes taking a pause. As leaders, we can be so wrapped up in the day-to-day that we don't think about ourselves. We're always putting everybody else first, our team first, our people first as leaders, worrying about them, making sure they have everything they need. And invariably, as a consequence, we then put ourselves last and we don't think of ourselves. But leadership can be, as we all know, one of the most challenging, high pressured positions that you can have in an organization. And you absolutely must take the time for yourself, the time to look after yourself, the time to rest and recover. Because, if you don't do that for yourself, then how are you going to do that for the rest of your team? It's like that brilliant example in an airplane. You've got to put your mask on before you help anybody else. You've got to take time to rest, to recuperate. And I made sure, as much as it always feels difficult to do it, I made sure that I did. Off the back of a race weekend, I always took my loo day on a Monday or a Tuesday, and I did nothing. And I think it's really important that you do that as a leader, and you take the time to rest. But I think it's important equally to have really great people around you. Physical and mental well-being, I think, is hugely powerful when you're a leader. Looking after that, making sure that you get time to exercise, making sure that you're physically fit. I couldn't have done my job if I didn't go running. So running for me was my absolute go-to for physical and mental health. Yeah, any time that I was a bit stressed, my running shoes would go on and I would go and run. Every race weekend that we had, I would run the racetracks. Every Friday, Saturday night, my trainers would go on and I'd be out there. I'd be overtaken by everybody else that was out running. But it's that moment where you can just take a minute for yourself and you can process everything that's going on. And then invariably you can get better outcomes when then you go back to it.
And I'm there with you. I was a running denier until I started doing it. And then I was like, oh, everyone's right. This is great for your mental health. And I think that's at the core of high performance, isn't it? It's that productive rest that goes alongside those gains and that performance. And Formula One obviously sits at the real pinnacle of high performance. I imagine teams require a very specific workplace culture to reach that high performance, to take P1 a race. what can businesses learn about high performance from Formula One?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Formula One, you've got to have perfection. And you've got to, that's the search in Formula One. It's for absolute perfection across every single area of your business. I always liken it to an orchestra. You've got to have the best players in your orchestra, and you've got to have them all playing the right note at the right time, because otherwise you don't have the symphony playing in the way that you need to. And it's exactly the same for a Formula One team. You've got to have the best people that you can possibly recruit. You've got to have those people in the right jobs. So just always check in and make sure you're asking your people to do the job that best suits their skill set. Having the right environment, we've talked about culture already, having the right environment to ask people to work in is so important. And I have seen this firsthand. When you don't have that great culture running through your team, when you don't have a good environment, when even small things like, if the paint's peeling off the walls, what message does that send to your people? It sends the message that, well, this business isn't, in great shape because, the leaders can't afford to paint the walls. But all those really small things all talk to culture, and therefore talk to creating a high performing team. Making sure your team have got the right resources, again, probably goes without saying. But are you actually checking in and asking your people if they've got the right resources to do their job? One of the best examples I had of this was when I was doing my mini town halls, and I talked to our manufacturing people, and they were up in arms, and I was like, my God, this is not going to be a good session. And they were so angry because we were asking them to do a job, yet we weren't giving them the tools with which to do it. So one of them couldn't get the bolts that he needed for his machine. You can buy them for 50p on Amazon. And yet he couldn't get them because we had layers of bureaucracy in our stores department that just wasn't giving him what he needed. Such an easy fix. But when you don't fix problems like that and they perpetuate, people get more and more miserable and more frustrated every day. And how can you possibly demand high performance from someone when they're frustrated because their organization isn't giving them what they want? So once you've got that, the right people in the right jobs with the right resources and the right environment, wrap it all up with great communications. And then I think then you're on a great pathway to a high performing team. But it is not the work of a moment. This can take years and years. I mean, look at the case of Williams now. Only 5 years later are we seeing change. And that's because change takes huge amounts more time than we probably ever anticipate it will.
And there's all these, as you mentioned, little facets that come together to create high performance. And I'm sure, within the sport, you've witnessed how a negative culture can lead to poor strategy and poor overall confidence in teams. From what you've witnessed, how can a negative workplace culture impact performance specifically?
Again, I think it goes back to this environment that you're asking people to work in. If you aren't giving them a safe space, a space where they feel respected, where they feel trusted and valued, then how can you ask those people to perform at their best? If someone isn't being respected in the workplace, as an example, if their colleagues are bullying them, or not even necessarily bullying them, but not treating them with respect, not including them for whatever reason, that person's going to feel isolated and ostracized. And it doesn't take rocket science to work out that if the person feels isolated and ostracized, you're not going to get the best performance out of them. So those negative cultures, they're going to impact your business more severely than you can possibly imagine. You've got to get to the root heart of those kinds of issues if you've got them, and you've got to be, as a leader, brave and front up to them. And it was certainly something that we had to do when we had a real issue with disrespectful behavior in our organization. We had to tackle it head on, and we had to be open and honest and talk about this behavior, put in a zero tolerance policy, and not allow and accept it, because you cannot have people in your organization operating at their peak when they don't feel that they're in a safe space.
Yeah, you touched on a really important point there, which is the impact that inclusivity can have on workplace well-being. And motorsports, at least on the surface, from kind of an outsider looking in, it still seems to be incredibly male-dominated. As one of only 2 women to lead a Formula One team, what changes did you make at Williams to create better pathways for women in Formula One?
It's definitely one of my passion projects, talking about diversity and inclusion at Williams and within the sport as a whole. And I took over the running the team in 2013, long before a lot of this became part of mainstream conversation. And I certainly had my challenges being a woman in a very male-dominated world, but being a woman at the top. And that's where the issues started to arise for me. But I've always been one of those people that when I'm faced with negativity, it just makes me fight harder and push back even stronger. And that's certainly what I think I did during my time at Williams. I had seen bad situations. I'd experienced challenging circumstances, all because of my gender. And I wasn't prepared to allow that. And I certainly felt that if I was experiencing this, being the boss's daughter, et cetera, then what on earth were other marginalized, I suppose, individuals experiencing? And this wasn't okay. And so I did absolutely set about creating new pathways to ensure that the next generation of women, or whoever it may be, had a much better experience coming up through the ranks. So as I briefly mentioned about earlier, we put in a respect policy at Williams. So we had a zero tolerance towards any disrespectful behaviour. And that was mostly focused around the women in our organisation. We put in a Women at Williams network to support the women that we had within the team, but also to educate all the men within our team. This is a very male-dominated racing team. We wanted to bring them with us on our journey and to educate them about what it is to be, or how it is to be different being a female in the workplace versus being a male, because there are huge differences and we've got to address them, and we've got to make sure that we're creating the right environment for everybody if we're going to get the best performance out of them.
It just sounds like so many beautiful changes for people's experience within Williams, and so many applicable changes that can be applied to other sectors, because obviously Formula One isn't the only sector that lacks female representation. So with that in mind, what advice do you have for women wanting to break into male-dominated industries?
I would say strap yourself in, lean in, and don't let the negative voices stop you. Like, punch through it, because if you're brave enough, you can do it. And then you end up as a role model. And we need so many more role models, female role models, at the top of their game. And I always say, if I can do it, anyone can do it. I wasn't the bravest, I wasn't the smartest, but I believed in what I was doing, and I was incredibly passionate about what I was doing. And yes, I had, the protection of being the boss's daughter and all of that kind of stuff. But that's where you have to look at building that network of support around you, people that can prop you up, people that can lift you up. That is so important if you're going to become, I think, a woman at the top of their game. You've got to make sure you surround yourself with the right people, and you've absolutely got to have the right mindset going into it, and understanding that you belong there. You're there on merit. People have probably put you there because they believe that you can do the job. That self-belief is so important for us all, not just for women. But if you're going to lead a business, you absolutely need to have that self-belief that you're there for a reason and you can absolutely get this job done.
I mean, a really great bit of advice that my friend gave me is that you're allowed to take up space as a person and as a professional. Yeah. And it's this idea that women in industry, we should be carving out space for ourselves, and we should be carving out space for each other, and not being afraid to take up space in these sectors that have so historically been male dominated. Really, really important area to continue talking about. And I would love to talk about it forever with you, but I must shift topics slightly. To another area that I think is really important and really ever evolving in F1. And there's a lot of exciting women working in this area in F1, and that is sustainability. It's increasingly being brought up in conversation around motorsports. How did you tackle sustainability at Williams?
So we obviously had our brilliant Formula One team, and we were absolutely looking at all the traditional areas, I suppose. And bear in mind that this was when I was running the team, we were looking at this, this is 5 years ago since I left. So 10 years while we were looking at it, the hybrid engines came into the sport. We were doing the very traditional elements. So making sure we recycled and trying to be responsible when we were booking flights, all that kind of stuff. Formula One has gone down a whole new pathway again of trying to tackle the sustainability problem. And, from around bringing in biofuels, sustainable fuels coming in 2026, to looking at their engines, looking at how they're going to transport people around the world. And that's one of the biggest areas Formula One has to focus on, because that is the greatest impact that they have when it comes to their carbon footprint, is taking the circus around the world. And they've got to get on top of that. But going back to what we did at Williams, as I said, we did all the traditional elements that you would expect. But one of the pieces of work that I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that we did was that we had an advanced engineering business that ran alongside the F1 business. And that business effectively took the technologies that we had developed in Formula One and commercialized them. And most of these technologies were around lightweight materials and more significantly, EV technology. And we became one of the preeminent designers and developers in the EV space at that time. We had partnerships with lots of other motorsport teams, but equally in automotive, healthcare, defense, and aerospace. And we were making significant inroads and impacts. And one of the greatest examples I will ever talk about when I talk about how we contributed to creating a more sustainable world was our partnership with Unilever, which was mostly on the F1 side. You saw the wonderful stickers on our race cars, but we had a behind the scenes project with them, whereby they came to us and said, we have these enormous cooling towers around the world where we make our washing powders, but they are incredibly energy inefficient. Through the heating process, we lose all this energy, our heating bills are sky high, and we've got plants all around the world, help us. We had this brilliant little widget that could be retrofitted on these kinds of things, for want of a better word, that could recapture that lost energy and reuse it. And we retrofitted this technology into Unilever's cooling towers around the world, which not only drove their emissions down, but also drove down their energy costs as well. And you can imagine the impact that would have had on a business like Unilever, not only on their bottom line, but on their sustainability position as well. And something that we were really proud of at Williams, and we did this with lots of supermarkets. When you walk down the supermarket aisles and you like, oh my God, I need a jacket, it's so cold, even though it's 100 degrees outside. All of that is just lost energy, going through those fridges. Our widgets would recapture that energy, reuse it, and then bills come down. But also it's much better for the environment, most importantly. The business now that we had at Williams that did operate in this space has now been bought by one of the largest iron ore mining companies in the world. And they are using it to achieve real zero, not net zero, but real zero across all of their operations. And they're based in Northern Australia by 2030. And they are on target to achieve that. So when we talk about what Williams achieved, what my family achieved in Formula One, we had this wonderful history and heritage that we've created on the racetrack, 16 world championships, but equally we used those technologies to address some of these real world issues that the world is facing today when it comes to climate change.
Wow, all these innovations that I think people don't realize comes from F1. You think it's, fast cars going around a circuit. I love your description of calling it a circus, because that is, you watch Drive to Survive and that is sometimes what it feels like. But yeah, these incredible innovations that people don't necessarily realize are being pioneered within Formula One. And I know the sort of entire sport is taking steps to becoming more sustainable. F1 launched its sustainability strategy a few years ago with a goal to become a net zero carbon sport. And there's obviously many other strategies alongside that. Do you think Formula One is moving in the right direction towards sustainability?
I think it is. I think it is taking it incredibly seriously. There's a lot of work to do. And as I mentioned earlier, it's actually the circus and moving it around the world that is probably going to cause the biggest challenge. But that is one of the things that is brilliant about Formula One. You set the people in Formula One a challenge and they always rise to it. And they always seem to be able to meet the objective far faster than so many other industries out there.
Absolutely. I imagine it's difficult logistically because you can't exactly put Carlos Sainz on a bus and send him across Europe, because I imagine there's lots of safety protocols and logistic nightmares that go into that. But it's really reassuring to know that the sport is taking those steps to become more sustainable. So we've talked about so many fantastic different topics today: high performance, female representation, sustainability, all areas that contribute to shape motorsports. Before I let you go, I would absolutely love to know, what are your predictions for the future of Formula One?
That's a really interesting question. Formula One is one of those industries that evolves continuously, but always inevitably looks the same.
Yeah.
And I hope that the sport doesn't evolve beyond its true DNA. I think Formula One is this incredible, magical mix of man and machine. And I think that's where it needs to stay at its heart, at its core. One of the things that we're obviously seeing at the moment, and everybody is intrigued to see how AI will impact Formula One. We talk about technology and innovation, and we've had eras of incredible innovations in Formula One, whether that be around delivering amazing technologies in aerodynamics, or bringing in active ride suspensions, real true mechanical engineering innovations. Now, in the 2010s, it was all about data and how can fast and high powered data impact performance. Now it's AI. And we're really going to be, I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how that can impact the sport, but whether the sport can keep those boundaries to protect man and machine and the incredible achievements that man can bring to performance. I wouldn't personally want to see those lines diluted, but I think, Formula One is going from strength to strength at the moment, and it's become, I think it's probably one of the most popular sports on the planet, if not the most popular sport on the planet now. And I can understand that. As you can imagine, I've always loved this sport. What those guys do when they put their visors down, they get in their race cars and the lights go green. It is quite extraordinary. But what I find even more extraordinary is what the teams are able to achieve in this sport. So few people, unfortunately, have the privilege to be able to see behind the scenes and to understand the blood, sweat, and tears that goes in to putting just two race cars out on a grid on a Sunday afternoon. And it is absolutely mind-blowing.
And that's what I think makes the sport so exciting. I've been a fan of the sport for a few years, and I must admit, before I became a fan of it, I was more MotoGP because they overtake each other more. But what I found when I first started learning about strategy, when you start to learn about Formula One, the inner workings of Formula One, it becomes so interesting. So I'm so thrilled that we were able to sit down and talk about all these different topics. So thank you so much for joining me, Claire.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for having me.